his arms around her, he said, Julie, baby, you're my flame.
Okay, I'll see if I can fix this. As the usher of the Black Grotto, I am one of the only civilians who has the power of arrest, but I promise I won't do that to any of you. Here, is that going to stay, do you think? That's just the cover of my latest book, which I was hoping was going to be here by today. It's at the printers, though, I'm assured by my publishers. It is a pleasure to be here to celebrate the beginning of the National Year of Reading, and what better day to do it than Valentine's Day?
Indeed.
Because this year, we who love reading are going to be more persistent than callers from an Indian call centre, louder than fans at an AFL grand final, and getting our message out there better than the Gillard government. No, let's set the bar a little bit higher than that, shall we? But why are we doing this? Because we love books and what reading can give to you, and we want everybody else to love them too. And the best time to sow the seeds of a love of reading is, of course, in childhood. I share a birthday with the most beloved book of parents everywhere, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. The Very Hungry Caterpillar is quite possibly the perfect children's book. It has bright, highly contrasted illustrations which complement the story on each page. It features food, and somebody once said that food in children's books is the equivalent to sex in adult books. I'm not quite sure if that's right, but descriptions of food and eating delight young children. It features transformation, and that ability to change from one thing to another recurs in all sorts of stories, from Cinderella to Twilight, from The Secret Garden to Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials series. And transformation contains at its heart the element of surprise. You don't know what it is you will change into, only that it will be better, that it will enable you to rise above what troubles you, and that when you change, you will be free. Despite not reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar when I was a child, I developed a fervent love of reading from the minute I first learned to sound out a sentence. I grew up in a household that didn't have very many books in it. But my grandfather, a policeman, had a love of language that he passed on to his children and his grandchildren. He used to sit at the table with a bottle of beer and a dictionary. He'd read out a word and say, "What do you reckon that means?" We'd all have a guess, and after we'd all got it wrong, he'd read out the definition, shake his head and say, "Bugger me." My mother, who'd briefly been a nurse, taught me the Latin roots of words so that I could understand not only what a word meant, but how it got to mean it. And my father, who left school at 14, used to make up stories when I was a child, featuring me undertaking various adventures in the creek at the back of our house. I can't remember the detail of those stories anymore, but I can remember the excitement of having something made up on the very spot just for me. The books I had and treasured as a child were standard fare. Hardback Dr. Seuss, the little golden books, Enid Blyton, a book of poems. But I read them and reread them until their spines cracked and the pages turned soft with use. I was fascinated by the rhythm of language, obsessed with some words, repulsed by others. I remember, for example, in year 1, the words able to were enough to give me conniptions, and I know I am not alone in still loathing the phrase tuck shop. Pronunciation of words I'd never heard spoken confounded me, and I'm still regularly surprised when a word I've been saying silently to myself for years turns out to sound entirely different. The first books I fell in love with, aided by the television series, no doubt, were the Little House on the Prairie books. For those of you who don't know, the Little House on the Prairie books were set in the Midwest of the US in the 1870s and 80s and featured a pioneering family making their way west to the promised land they would surely arrive at after the next wheat crop or the next homestead or the next Westwood town. The Ingalls family suffer all kinds of privations and setbacks, but they never lose their undaunted spirit, their ability to bounce back from misfortune and illness and somehow find spiritual redemption in them. The heroine of the Little House books is Laura. Laura is bright and bursting with energy, and although she tries to be good, she can't help the naughty things she thinks and occasionally does. When she slaps her annoyingly perfect, blonde, pretty sister Mary across the face after Mary has taunted Laura about her brown hair, you want to applaud. When she leads snooty Nellie Olsen into the creek until leeches attach themselves to Nellie's delicate town girl legs, you admire the ingenuity of her revenge. And later, when Nellie is making a move on Laura's soon-to-be fiancé, when the three of them are going on a horse and buggy ride, and Laura accidentally makes the horses bolt so the fiancé can see Nellie's true colours, you are pleased that despite the strictness of her upbringing, Laura's spirit has not been diminished. But aside from the pleasure of watching late 19th century girly combat, the Little House books require that the reader imagine what it was like to live in a radically different time and place. And it wasn't just the concept of having a weekly bath or having to hand sew all of your clothes that fascinated me. And incidentally, the Little House books are full of detailed descriptions of delicious food like pig's tails and maple syrup candy and roast prairie chicken and gravy. Mark will make something delicious out of anything. But one of the central events in the Little House series, and the one that separates the books about Laura's childhood from those of her adolescence, is the devastating toll that scarlet fever had on the family. I remember reading and rereading the beginning of the book that marks this change, this one by the shores of Silver Lake. And it starts. Laura was washing the dishes one morning when old Jack, lying in the sunshine on the doorstep, growled to tell her someone was coming. She looked out and saw a buggy crossing the gravelly ford of Plum Creek. "Ma," she said, "it's a strange woman coming." Ma sighed. She was ashamed of the untidy house, and so was Laura. But Ma was too weak, and Laura was too tired, and they were too sad to care very much. Mary and Carrie and baby Grace and Ma had all had scarlet fever. The Nelsons across the creek had had it too, and so there was no one to help Pa and Laura. The doctor had come every day. Pa did not know how he could pay the bills. Far worst of all, the fever had settled in Mary's eyes, and Mary was blind. I'd already been introduced to the idea of living with blindness. It's interesting that Seelan mentioned that when we're talking about reading, but I'd already been introduced to this idea by two other books that I got from the Scholastic Book Club. One was about Helen Keller and it had the raised braille alphabet on the back, and the other one was about Helen Keller's teacher called Helen Keller's Teacher. And these combined with what happened to Mary made me imagine quite obsessively what it would be like. What would I do if such a calamity as being blind one day happened to me? So to this end, I vowed to spend days, entire days, being blind. If my mother thought there was something odd about me sitting at the kitchen table, eating my toast and Vegemite with my eyes scrunched up, she didn't say it aloud. She also refrained from commenting when we were going to the supermarket and I felt my way up the aisles with outstretched hands. Sure, I might have cheated by opening one eye from time to make sure I wasn't going to collide with the cornflakes display and to check out the satisfyingly baffled expressions on the faces of other shoppers, but my intentions were good. My reaction to reading about these blind girls might have been a little extreme, but it is also an indication, I think, of what reading can do, and to me, what it should do. And that's to get the reader to inhabit somebody else's skin, to deeply imagine their way into an experience that's foreign to them, and by doing so, to create empathy that's hard to develop any other way. Because I so loved reading and my husband so loved reading, and we have a house that's so full of books that we have to cull them every 12 months so that we can walk through the living room, we were keen to share our love of stories and words with our daughter, who is now 15 and in year 11. We read to her every night. We read poems. We read stories. We read the books we'd had as children and books that I wished we'd had, like Roald Dahl. Her favourite book was Peepo, which we changed so that the baby was a she and not a he. As well as this, her father John each night made up stories in which she featured, just as my father had done. With this grounding in story and language, I was sure we'd done all the things to create a lifelong reader. I was wrong. I'm not sure when I noticed that while Annie was keen to be read to, she did not share the same enthusiasm when it came to cracking open a book herself. Part of it might have been that she was surrounded by precocious readers. Her two good friends started reading at age 3 and her cousin a year later. Part of it might have been that her eyesight was so bad that she was on the verge of going blind in one eye by the time it was detected. Part of it might have been her borderline ADHD, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, we did everything we could to encourage her to discover the pleasure of reading, including bribery. I even wrote a book about her, which featured Annie herself, called, and no small irony, The Girl Who Fell Into a Book. She never read it. It's not even that long. Or I have to say, any of my other books. In what she feels is quite a cruel twist of fate, though, she's being forced to read my novel By Beautiful for Year 11 this year. I think she's up to page 5. Anyway, so I wrote my latest novel, Losing It, to appeal to the Annies of the world. It's a young adult novel about a group of Year 12 girls who make a bet to lose their virginity before Schoolies Week. And I think it's fair to say that no parent has ever worked so hard to encourage their child to read, from childhood books to young adult books. But, you know, finally I've got success, if only of a limited kind. Annie has read it and she loves it. So if she reads it, I think anybody probably will. Which brings me back to what we should probably keep in mind for the National Year of Reading. Not everybody is going to become a reader. But there will always be books that we connect with, whether we're bookworms or whether we're Christmas and Easter readers. And our job as ambassadors of reading, either personally or professionally, is to make sure we can connect the right books with the right readers. And we should be reminded that reading is not just and is more than words on a page. The YouTube version of The Very Lazy Caterpillar has had in excess of 1,381,000 hits. Is it reading? Maybe not. But it's still the thing that's at the heart of reading, and that's a story. But the medium does change a story. Witness what happens when our favourite books are made into movies. And there is something else beside the texture of pages, the smell of the book, and the tension that builds between one page and the next. And that's the quality of attention that reading, as opposed to watching, commands. Paul Higgins, a futurist who works in Melbourne, recently said that the scarcest commodity of the 21st century is to have somebody's full attention. The world is full of things demanding a piece of our attention here and a piece more there. Reading books, works against the trend towards partial attention and partial awareness. In reading a good book, a book that is right for you, you become one with that book, and you might even fall into it. And this training in delighted but conscious absorption is what our children need, more than anything else apart from food, shelter and love, and maybe equally so. And they deserve it from us. Happy Valentine's Day, happy Year of Reading, and thank you for your attention.
That I love you so.